without further ado, welcome, Deborah. I'm just so glad to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you for your persistence.
Well, goodness,
Oh
we were both, you know what? Sometimes I think that things like this happen to test us as far as the topic that we're going to be talking about. And since we're talking about the hypothalamus, the center of stress, it kind of makes sense that we would have something stressful to test our hypothalamuses.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All my patients with hypothalamic dysfunction are very challenging. They're challenged and they challenge me. just like these devices do.
Well, we got you on your smartphone, and so that's great. We do have some people signing on. Thank you, everybody, for coming back on. So let me just, what I know about Deborah is, and I've had the pleasure of reading her book. I have, since we last spoke 2 weeks ago, I have been taking her hypothalamic nutrients. And I don't know, I mean, I don't think I'm well, I could get stressed, and I was in a car accident about a week ago, so there is opportunity for stress. And I was taking that nutritional support the whole time, for sure, and really focused on my stress. But it's something that so many of us are confronted with, and you see it in patients all across the board. You've been in practice since 1987. You're in Ojai, California. And so you started to see patterns. So why don't you tell us about how you even came to be thinking about the hypothalamus?
Well, that's kind of a funny story. So when I started my integrative practice in 97, so I left conventional medicine, started integrative practice, literally put it out to the universe. Okay, I want to really understand neuro-immune-endocrinology. So the neurological system, the immune system, and the hormone system, and how it all connected. And so I'm doing family medicine. I'm seeing women, children, men, the whole gamut. And all of a sudden I'm getting busloads of kind of the sickest people are just flocking to me, challenging me as I asked to really look into this. And I kept asking, looking at what research I could get a hold of, which there wasn't much back in the late 90s at all. I mean, there was no Google or anything, trying to figure out what was the common denominator here. Well, one of the things I started seeing is I was seeing mostly females, but some men, they were all overweight, mainly over fat, okay? Low lean body mass, high body fat. They were depressed. They weren't sleeping. They were super stressed out. So they had adrenal insufficiency. Their thyroids were low, either clinically or subclinically, meaning, and I'm assuming we have some patients in public, not just integrative providers here. So subclinical hypothyroidism basically means that your TSH is elevated, meaning your thyroid is too low, but your thyroid, the numbers, the T4 and T3 are not too low. So we're seeing all of these issues. They're constipated, they're cold, they have no energy, they're not sleeping. And I just was looking for something that was the common denominator. And I happened to be get a Scientific America magazine, and they were studying fat white mice. And I opened it up, and the white mice had all the symptoms my patients did. And they sacrificed the mice. And they found that pro-opiomelanocortin was dysregulated.
Right? Some people might notice POMC.
Okay. It's a hypothalamic hormone. It's 256 amino acids. It's huge. And it breaks down to cortico-releasing factors, so it literally controls your adrenals. It breaks down to thyroid-releasing factors, so it controls the thyroid. Glucose-releasing factor controls how your liver stores glucose, as well as your glucose metabolism and insulin resistance. It controls melanocyte-stimulating hormone, which is crazy. That's controlling your day-night cycles. So there was that insomnia. And everything else becomes endorphins, beta endorphins. So they weren't happy. So that was the key.
What did you do for them in that study? Was there anything that they did therapeutically?
We're just like, why are they all like this? What's the common denominator? It was this one big, huge hormone. And they started saying, well, maybe the hypothalamus is at the root. So at that point, I took off. I decided, well, if we're studying it in animals, it'll be 10, 15, 20 years before they figure this out in people. And I had a whole bunch of sick people I was dealing with. So I decided, you know what could I feed the hypothalamus? What could I do? How could I change their lifestyle? What else do I need to do to fix this? And I developed just a short blood test where I would look to see all of these parameters, these lower levels of hormones, because you can't measure hypothalamic hormones.
Right.
without killing the lab rat. Of course, I'm not going to do that to my poor patients, right? So I have to look at something else. So it evolved into kind of a field biology, vet medicine, intuitive practice, and using whatever tools I could find. Blood work. I tried saliva for a while, urine testing. I mean, did everything and came down with a very specific set of blood tests that I do to see if the hypothalamus is out of balance. And the way I explain it to my patients is it's kind of like I'm on a trail and I'm a field biologist and I see coyote scat. I know the coyote's been there and I can test it to see if it's an estrus and if it's healthy, but I haven't seen the coyote. I don't get to see the hypothalamus, but I can look at the leftovers and say, hey, think something's going on here.
So can you detail us on what some of those blood test biomarkers are? I'm sure that when you first started out, are they primarily sex hormones or do they go beyond sex hormones into glucose, insulin?
It's a pretty simple test. So remember, just because I'm running the test doesn't mean I'm looking at it with, is it in the norm eyes? So I'm not necessarily looking at individual scores. I'm looking at them all together.
Okay.
So my basic blood test is I do a lipid profile. Now, back then it was just a basic lipid profile. Now I do subparticle sizes. I'm very interested in their LDL size. Okay. And the reason I'm interested in that is if they're producing big fat particles and their LDL's high, then I know they're hormonally challenged. I know that it's going to be steroid hormones that are off, right? Your adrenal hormones and your sex hormones, because they're made from those big fat LDL molecules. So I look at that. I look at hemoglobin A1C and C-peptide. Okay. I look at unconjugated DHEA as well as DHEA sulfate, which is the conjugated form, the active form. I do TSH, free T3, free T4. Okay. And then if they're female, I'll do an FSH and an LH. If they're male, I'll do an LH. I do not look at their sex hormones. I'm looking at pituitary function. Okay. And what I'm trying to see is there an imbalance in any of those hormones that are off? If I'm seeing a little bit of a deficiency in the adrenals and a little bit in the thyroid, and it doesn't make sense what I'm seeing with the FSH and LH, say in a female compared to what I'm seeing in her clinically, then there's a little miscommunication there. Typically, go ahead.
Well, I'm just curious, since much arises from the hypothalamus, if there's any dysfunction in the thyroid or in the adrenals, I think that so many, I know that people might be upset with me for saying this, but I think so many people focus on adrenal fatigue rather than focus on hypothalamic dysfunction.
Yes, right? That's true.
We're done with if we get to the adrenals, it's too late. And so it's almost like, how do we course correct? How do we go back? And it's almost like everything that you said, I would think that even symptomatically, without even doing a blood test, you could say.
Exactly. So I do the blood test so my patients have some numbers to play with. I don't really need the blood test. I've been doing this so long, I can tell. So when I'm seeing multiple hormones out of balance, and I'm seeing this in a fatigued patient, she's not sleeping, she's having trouble losing weight, and she's tried everything. Okay. She's super stressed out. She may even have slightly high blood pressure, slightly high pulse. I mean, she has all the autonomic symptoms. She's starting to break out. She's having multiple food sensitivities. She's calling it food allergies. That wasn't an issue before. She's becoming ill with multiple. So her immune system is a little dysfunctional. She's either catching way more bugs than she ever caught before, or God forbid, she's moving into these insidious cancers that we're seeing. And so her immune system isn't functioning properly, or she has old viruses kind of surfacing back up again, Epstein-Barr virus, herpes, she gets shingles, things are happening. Like, what is going on here with this patient that she's dysfunctional? She's moody, she's irritable, and she will say, and I'm saying she because it's mostly the females that are coming and being very, very out front and saying, something is wrong, and I've seen so many people, nobody's helping me, and they keep saying my blood work's fine, and they want to give me an antidepressant or a sleeping pill, and I'm like, this just doesn't feel right. Something's wrong.
So do you tend to, I'm kind of curious about the therapeutic intervention, and being that everybody's falling into the same bucket, do you take the same approach more or less with many people? I'm just curious about food. If we could just talk about diet first.
Yeah.
Maybe take us into certain nutrients for the hypothalamus.
Okay.
supplements, and then any other lifestyle modalities that you feel are important, like physical activity or anything else. Sleep, you've already mentioned. So walk us through maybe food. I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are on that.
Well, it really matters if I'm looking at someone that does have any signs of really early insulin resistance, but I put them on a very modified insulin resistant diet that I came up with, something that's easy to follow, especially if they're coming from the standard American, aka SAD diet, something very easy to follow to get them started. But it's not just about what they eat, it's about when they eat. Okay.
The hypothalamus specifically, right?
Oh, absolutely.
So more about that, please.
Yeah. So it's also about when they eat. And there's a brand new study since we talked last, literally since we talked last, looking at body clock and hypothalamic control of eating behaviors as well. So, and it's what I've been prescribing to my patients for 20 plus years. But basically, if you're going to have any carbs, it has to be in the morning. It cannot be before 6 o'clock because you're in low metabolic mode. So it has to be after the sun rises. Okay.
And is it for everybody, or is it for certain constitutional types, whether you're a morning person or if you're, depending on your chronotype?
Well, there is a chronotype aspect to it. And I do work with my people who are like basically graveyard shift people. But honestly, most of those people adopted that type because of stress. Very few of us, brand new babies, come in learning a day-night cycle according to what they're exposed to by their parents. So I was, nurse practitioner forever. My husband was a police officer. We worked grave shift, and we were constantly shift working in the beginning. So we adapted our very, very small infants to our shift, and babies will adapt to that.
Right.
Okay. So if you have a stressed out household that's not turning lights off at night, and it's constantly under stress, that child is not going to have a set circadian rhythm to start with. I do believe there are what I call them the watchers of the village, and they are rare. They are not the majority. These people who think they need to stay up all night, and they are people that have a dyscircadian rhythm, and they should probably be watching us at night. Okay, but that is not all of us. The most of us are disturbed because of these digital devices and the blue light coming off those screens, and we're having trouble sleeping. So most sleep disturbances.
The lifestyle, right? As we talk about strategies. Yeah. Okay, so I'm curious to go back to food because I'm experimenting with different approaches myself. So I'm tuning into this to really understand it. So carbohydrates in the morning. What else do we have to note for diurnal reasons and kind of going with circadian rhythm?
So basically avoiding the carbohydrates at night, and that's when you're eating your high fat.
Okay.
Moderate protein, high fat. So if you're going in that direction, we're talking, avocados, nuts and seeds, fatty fish at night, you're going to less likely store the fat then, and your hypothalamus and your adrenals love fat. I mean, they're just going to be your adrenals aren't going to be stressed. You're not going to have cortisol spikes at night if you feed yourself fat before you go to bed.
And so just to divert a little bit, what about all of this work on time-restricted feeding? And so having an 8-hour window, a 12-hour window, does that tie into this at all? Do you see fasting?
Yes, I do. So again, I try to have my patients eat during the daylight. And so they have a longer, especially if they need to lose weight. If they need to lose weight, eat during the daylight, which means they have a longer feeding time in the summer and shorter in the winter. Right. But if they're going to eat after dark, they can't have the carbs.
So really we should just move with the light. I think about Nordic countries like Sweden. I was there in April one year and it didn't get dark until I think 2 a.m. So it's okay for them to be eating until 2 a.m. as long as it's light. As long as they're active. I mean, are they going to be active for 16 hours, 20 hours? So they're going to have to adapt to that. So if you look at where populations are in the world, the majority of populations hang around the equator. And then they're sparse as they get farther away from the equator, right? Because lifestyles are more difficult. And most people that live very, very far north and south, those particular ethnicities, tend to be really good at packing on the fat and going into hibernation mode. They have those insulin resistant genes on because they've got to adapt to, basically low food sources at multiple times, long period of times during the year. So you're in tune with the latest research. And so you saying all of this about people living close to the equator or further away, it makes me think of these recent studies that are coming out now about feeding animals food that is out of season So it's out of seasonality. So in these particular studies, taking cherries and then changing the day-night cycle for whether it's the mouse or the rat, and then feeding cherries and finding that during the time that would correlate to summer, there is more of an energy accumulation.
Right.
And during winter, you know, if you're having these things during winter, it's like the body does different dysfunctional things with it, and mainly through the lens of the adipocyte. So I'm just curious.
Exactly.
Yeah. Do you talk about seasonality with your patients?
Oh, absolutely. Trying to eat foods in season. Trying to eat as locally as possible, foods in season and wide variety. Because foods out of season the DNA in that food confuses your DNA. So we are very in touch with what's going on the earth, what's going on with our sun, how close the moon is. We all know this. Women, most of my female patients mark their cycles by the moon. Not just a calendar. That's what we used to, and our bodies respond to that. We're still in touch with it as much as we think we're very, very evolved. We very much are part of this earth and where we are in the season, how close we are to the sun, how much daylight we have. So if we can follow those body rhythms, we will be so much healthier. And the hypothalamus loves that. When you're not following it, it gets stressed out and it puts you in that survival mode, and it tells your adrenals, we've got to get away from the tiger. Of course, it's not a real tiger. Your bills are just late, or you're late for work, or you're having a disgruntled conversation with your employer. Something's happening, but your life is not being threatened, but the reaction is exactly the same.
So let's talk about nutrients.
Okay.
Excuse me. I'm wondering if you can override some of these effects. So recently I just came back from the UK. I'm still a little bit jet lagged. Can I be signaling to my hypothalamus that I'm in my correct time zone just through nutrition?
You can. Yeah, you can. So basically, the nice thing about the hypothalamus, it is not protected by the blood-brain barrier. So it's actually very, very amenable to nutrients. Now, the nutrients have to be very clean per se. You know, it doesn't recognize the artificials. It gets exposed to all your toxins too. So anything that's kind of that's artificial, it's going to see as a toxin. So as clean as possible. It's super responsive to amino acids, very responsive to amino acids, very responsive to essential fatty acids, and the more broken down the molecule that's closer to our own inflammatory chains of fatty acids, the more likely the hypothalamus is going to get a response to it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So let me just back up and repeat what you just, because it's very profound, and I don't know if everybody caught that. So in other words, what you said, and you said this last time too when we logged on, which it really hit me in a different way because I didn't realize this. You know, it's textbook information. The idea that the hypothalamus is not protected by the blood-brain barrier. Is it the only part of the brain that is not protected by the blood-brain barrier?
Yes.
And so anything in the systemic circulation can impact the hypothalamus. So if you're having psychoactive substances in your food because it contains neurotransmitters, like whether it's GABA or serotonin from food, chances are you could be impacting the hypothalamus.
Absolutely. Okay. Absolutely. In a good way or a bad way.
Yeah.
You know, you're a little stressed out. You crave some dark chocolate because it's going to help. The hypothalamus is going to get it right away.
And cytokines, inflammation.
Absolutely. And also all of the things you're allergic to. And if you have a leaky gut and it's, you know, all of the food allergens coming through, it's affected by everything. Why? Because it is set for survival. So it's literally reading everything in your body all the time. 4 out of 5 of your senses pass through the hypothalamus. Everything floating around in your bloodstream is the hypothalamus gets to see and experience. All your hormones, all your cytokines, all your immune factors, and it controls all the amino acids coming into the brain to produce neurotransmitters. It is the master controller.
It is the master controller. I mean, it's quite profound, everything that the hypothalamus does. I do have a comment and a question, but before we get to them, can you just give us a bulleted list? And I know that you know this backwards and forwards. It's in your book and all that, of what the hypothalamus does specifically for us. So it's the temperature control center, energy regulation, hormones. What else do we need to know about the hypothalamus? Sleep control, circadian rhythms.
Reproduction, sex drive. New study, it controls memory and learning, which I saw amazingly in my learning disabled children and my demented patients. Like if you feed the hypothalamus, it clears this up. So it controls besides the weight set point, it also controls your hunger hormones. It's part of the gut. That is the gut brain connection with the hunger hormones and the communication with leptin in your adipose cells. So it's the hypothalamus controlling all that.
It almost feels like what doesn't the hypothalamus touch in the body, because everything that we just talked about is connected somewhere else, even to the gut, right?
Absolutely. And most of the lower glands just know what they do, per se. It's kind of like the hypothalamus is a CEO of your entire body, and everything else, your eyes and your adrenal glands, they're all like workers. Okay. They don't see the big picture, and the hypothalamus does.
So I'm going to ask you a question now. My neurons are going in different directions, and I just want to have this conversation forever with you. So, some of the research that is out there suggests that the heart rate variability can predict before even brain waves if something is going to happen. So if you say to me that, no, the hypothalamus is the control center, it knows all, it signals everywhere in the body, all of these endocrine glands, how is it then that the heart is coming into this? What's the relationship between the heart as a neuroendocrine gland, which we now know it is?
Yes, it is.
And the hypothalamus. I'm just kind of curious about that connection from a science and an intuitive perception, kind of that connection, that communication. I don't know if you know much about that in terms of research, but
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. I've been studying Heart Math Institute for a long time. So basically, I look at the heart as kind of like the receiver. Okay, so it's receiving information, vibration. It's changing its own neuroendocrine system. Okay, it's literally producing the hormones it needs. It's responding to neurotransmitters, and it's got to keep beating, right? And its variation. The hypothalamus, using it as a receptor, is connected directly to the heart, and it's receiving that information constantly. So it's almost like your heart knows, and the hypothalamus then interprets that information. Is this really danger? Is this really a situation we need to deal with? Is this something that I need to, interact in a different way? So it is the master controller, but it is super sensitive to the heart receiving the information at a fine level. It's almost like the heart is an instrument or a musician that just has such a fine-tuned ear that the rest of the body isn't hearing that, and the hypothalamus is. Are we in harmony or not? Are we not in harmony? Should we be out of here? Is this what's happening here?
The perfect marriage.
Exactly. Marriage. Beyond the eyes, beyond the sense of smell, beyond the hearing, beyond the kinesthetic. Where am I in space and time? It's those heart vibrations. Excellent. Now, unfortunately, most of us override that.
Right.
We ignore it. And our hypothalamus will set us into this stress mode because we're ignoring that most sensitive receptor.
So another tangential question, disruptors, which I think is a really good question. In your book, you do talk about intuition. You talk about yourself as being very intuitive. And so here's where we connect the dots between the science and the art of medicine. You've been in practice for a long time. And as a clinician, you start to develop that sense of pattern recognition, that sense of intuition. Knowing what you know about the hypothalamus, how does intuition connect into that heart-brain space? How would you, I guess this is probably more even a philosophical question, or maybe if you have science to support where you think intuition comes into the larger picture of the brain.
Well, I don't have scientific research in terms of like double-blind studies, but I do have 30 years of practice and 20 years 22 now, focusing on the hypothalamus. And what I have found is when I get patients' hypothalamus healthy again, they intuitively know what's best for their bodies, what's best for their minds, their relationships, socially and spiritually. They start to become their own body whisperer, per se. Their dreams become very lucid. They know what they need to eat. They start listening to those messages, and they stop judging. They get a perspective that they didn't have before. And that's because the hypothalamus is right underneath the thalamus, right, where the emotional center is. And so it's almost like, it's really interesting is when the hypothalamus starts getting balanced, a lot of your subconscious stuff comes up, okay?
Wow.
That you weren't really realizing were kind of getting in the way of your healing. So like, for instance, I had one of my menopausal patients, she gained some weight. She was struggling to lose the weight. It wasn't happening. We were doing the pillars, we were doing the sleep hygiene. She was going to bed in dark, turning off her digitals. She was eating in this body clock way, mostly insulin resistant. She was, active, doing like HIIT exercises 3 times a week and long, slow distance once a week. She was doing everything I prescribed and still was struggling. And then she had this inspiration. Some of it came through dreams. Some of it came in journaling, that she had always stayed thin for somebody else, for society, for her daddy, for her husband. And once she realized that, she said, to heck with it. I'm going to be who I want to be. Her body started dropping the weight.
Wow.
And she just fell in love with her body and stopped struggling.
Mm-hmm. And it's almost like we could even tie that into the stress response. When we're coming to a place of calm, it's like the noise goes away, the dust settles, and then we get clarity.
Mm-hmm.
Deborah, I have two things that are being posted here. So Michelle is saying eating seasonally and locally as much as possible. Yes, she's excited about that. And I know that Dr. Seguin does in Michigan State. She's really an advocate of local, sustainable food and farm to table, and really connecting those two dots. We have another question, which I think is a good one, and you broached it previously, talking about how the hypothalamus is exposed to so much because it's not protected. So what about obesogens? In other words, endocrine disrupting chemicals. Are those affecting the hypothalamus to
absolutely.
impetuosity? Is there research on that specifically, or is it more of a postulate of?
It's postulate at this point. I haven't seen that research quite yet, and hypothalamus is in my Google alert. And so I'm looking at everything that comes up. I have not seen that yet, but because we spoke it, we're going to see it. Within 6 months, I bet we will see some research there. Yeah, no, I am definitely seeing that the hypothalamus is incredibly, it's set, the little bit of research that's kind of in that aspect is that the hypothalamus is, inflammation in the hypothalamus affects obesity, and it affects energy production. Yeah. And so the hypothalamus is super, super sensitive to anything that will cause inflammation. Now, the way I want you to look at it, though, is if you're gaining weight during stress, you're a survivor. So thank your hypothalamus. Thank your hypothalamus for helping you survive this stressor. The ones who lose weight during stress, they're not going to make it. Okay? Now, we all lose a little bit in the beginning, and then we start gaining if it's chronic stress. So the first thing you need to do is quit fighting your body and thank your hypothalamus for helping you survive. It did exactly what it was supposed to do. Oh my gosh. The tiger's chasing her. She's going to be holed up in a cave. She's going to be up a tree. We better hold on to anything. She picks an apple, put it into body fat. Hold on to that energy, because pretty soon we're going to end up in a tree, right? So it's doing exactly what it's supposed to do. So make peace with it, and then start cleaning up your act, and not just what you're doing for yourself, but what you're thinking and what you believe.
So important. I like how you're threading together a lot of these very holistic messages of looking at physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, because it's all really connected to the hypothalamus, right? Yeah. So just to get back to the physical again, because I am curious with my background in nutrition, if you could give a similar bulleted list of certain nutrients, I mean, is there any nutrient that the hypothalamus wouldn't respond to? I mean, I almost think that you did mention amino acids and how important those are, and they are also
essential fatty acids. It responds really well to phosphatidylserine. It responds really well to. It's super sensitive to the adaptogens. So they're not just working on the adrenals; they're working on the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis is where they're working. So it's very responsive to minerals, super responsive to magnesium, especially magnesium threonate. It's very responsive. It's super responsive to minerals. So, any imbalances. So don't overdo it. It's going to read those electrolytes off. So don't, hyperdo too much magnesium or too much calcium, because it'll set off the hypothalamus as, okay, we're in danger. We're just eating up our own bones, or, so you
Right.
really have to be careful with it in terms of don't overdo it.
You
Okay.
know, there's something about minerals that you're mentioning. It's really interesting because in the literature there is an inverse relationship between heavy metals and essential minerals, and so the more metals we have, the less in the way of minerals, and just the reverse: the more minerals, the less metals. And I wonder if that's also something that the hypothalamus is connecting into.
Well, it
Um,
is, because those heavy metals, what they do on an endocrine basis is they actually take up the space in the receptor site. So they become part of the building blocks that the minerals would be in, right?
mhm,
Okay.
mhm.
So when they're part of those building blocks, then that makes that receptor site for the hormones, whether the receptor site's in the hypothalamus or whether it's in the breast tissue or wherever it is, the bone tissue, those receptor sites become a funky lock. They don't work anymore. So the key, the hormone's there, but the lock's not working. So having too many heavy metals in the system definitely affects hypothalamic communication, because it can be screaming at your lower endocrine glands. They're not responding.
They're not responding. And serine, you mentioned phosphatidylserine, and there's also amino acid serine. And I think that you've had a discussion even within your materials about serine. And I heard kind of through the grapevine about cultures that have extended lifespans having, whether they're taking in more of this L-serine, or, and serine, everybody, is S-E-R-I-N-E.
Mm-hmm. It's an amino acid.
Yeah, it's an amino acid. So is there anything more that we should know about L-serine or phosphatidylserine? Is there anything about longevity in serine? Is serine one of the, I noticed that
Well, serine was
you
definitely
that
one
an
of the
important
initial amino
acid.
acids I was really studying that kind of led me to this hypothalamic research, but it's one of many. They don't work by themselves.
Yeah, that's
Just
true.
like the B complex, it doesn't really work by
Yeah,
themselves. But the hypothalamus is a heavy user of serine from your diet, and you're going to get serine in your any protein
any
foods.
protein. Okay, it's
Exactly.
acidic.
So what I
Okay.
don't ever recommend for my patients to do, or for anybody to do, is to take single amino acids for long periods of time, because just like single minerals, it's going to throw off the rest of the balance.
Good off.
So
Mhm.
most amino acids usually are in the plant and animal kingdom in company with others.
Yes.
Okay. So, and I get that a lot with, okay, well, how do you deal with amino acids, and what's the difference between, I don't know, this free form complex and that free form? And
Or
the way
ratios.
I,
How do you know
yeah,
what
whey
to do?
aminos or beet aminos or pea aminos or whatever. The difference between the cow and the pea is how the amino acids are put together.
Yeah.
And the same with the hypothalamus. It's really sensitive to what you're giving it. So a variety of different foods. And I'm not just talking about limiting those supplements so you're not taking just single supplements, but also don't have a limited diet. You need to have
Mhm.
a varied diet. One of the big
Absolutely.
things that's missing in most of our diets is sea vegetation. We don't get
Interesting
enough of that.
meditation.
Sea vegetation, seaweed, stole seeds. So
Mhm.
if you
Mhm.
look at the way cultures developed, civilizations develop, they usually develop near water.
Yeah.
Okay, so they're either going to get the sea vegetation, algae, etc., and that gives so much trace minerals and so many nutrients that it's just rich in nutrition. But again, don't just fill up on chlorella. Don't just fill up on dulce. Don't you need a variety?
You need a variety. Absolutely.
Exactly.
So, Deborah, my final question to you, and I think that this will answer the initial question that we started out to answer, which was about diet, supplements, different nutrients, and then lifestyle. Since you're such a person who walks the talk, tell us about a day in the life of you. I'm kind of curious. How do you thread your day together and even your week? And through maybe your example, we can glean some pearls of what might be beneficial for helping us to live better lives.
So I usually start off my day by I wake up with the sun. I always have. I
And you
always
live
woke.
in California, so that's easy to
That's
do.
easy to do. But I'm super light sensitive. So when I travel and go to a hotel, I have to have that. I can't have a blackout shade because I need the sun to wake up, and I don't have to set an alarm. So it'll wake me up. I wake up with the sun. I usually um, desperately try to stay away from digital devices. So I usually start my first thing in the morning kind of just journaling. I journal my dreams. I journal,
Huh.
basically have kind of a meditative time. It could just be a few minutes. It could be longer according to how good those dreams were. And then I start my morning off with, getting up, and I take my nutrients and my mix, and I usually then make some kind of a hot beverage. It could be hot
You drink
lemon water.
coffee? I'm curious.
I do drink coffee. I do drink coffee.
Okay.
Now, I started drinking coffee when I was in my late 30s. I'm 58 now. And so I haven't drank coffee all my life. I didn't have a taste for it. But coffee to me is an emotional thing because it's something that my grandmother, my Nana, drank. And so it's very much a connection to her and another grandmother that I have. So to me, it's kind of, it's holy water. I don't know how to, it's like we're all together having our coffee, and then that's it. That's it for the caffeine for the day, kind of a thing.
Well, you
Lately,
have
I've been
Italian
what?
roots, right? It's kind of the Mediterranean experience
Yeah,
with
exactly.
coffee,
Yeah,
right?
that's I'm Italian, so that's part of the experience. But then that's it. And then I usually I do my early morning exercise. So whether it's a walk or my HIIT exercise or my strength training,
Now,
I'll
is
do
there a
that in the
reason you
morning.
do it in the morning versus
Absolutely,
why is
absolutely.
that in terms of the
Because
hypothalamus?
because your metabolism, so when you do the exercise first thing in the morning, your metabolism is set higher for the rest of the day
Okay.
versus when you do it later. If you do it
Mhm.
after dark, you've got cortisol running, and it's going to be hard for you to turn that off and get the melatonin turned back on. So I do it first thing in the morning. If I do any kind of exercise in the afternoon, it's a relaxing walk or something, or a bike
Okay.
ride, something easy. It's more of kind of a mental thing or yoga, but anything hard, any kind of hit, it's early in
Yeah,
the morning.
in
Yeah,
the morning. Okay. So
in the
what time
morning.
do you get to the office? And so you've had your mix, you've had your nutrients.
I do my exercise. I come back and eat something, and
You do. Okay.
yeah, I come back and eat something. I wake up hungry like a little kid, so I can't wait to eat. And we have fresh fruit growing everywhere, so I usually just pick an orange, and before I even get back into the house to get undressed, and I will eat. I eat eggs, veggies, oatmeal a couple
Do you eat
times a
beef?
week.
Do you eat
Um,
beef, pork,
uh-huh.
chicken?
I
Okay.
eat. I was a vegetarian for a long time until I started feeding my hypothalamus and it wanted to have the meats back. But in terms of the pyramid of my diet, there's a lot of plants in there. So it's a small portion, but it's mostly plants. Don't eat too many starchy carbohydrates
Okay.
at all. Eat a lot of fat. Usually I eat again around noon. I see patients in the morning and hang out with them. I move around a lot. I don't sit a lot. So I move around. I actually have my office with a garden, so sometimes we go out in the
No,
garden. So
nice.
and I grow a lot of my medicinal herbs out there, and so kind of it's a teaching garden. And then and again, that's another thing with the genetics and locally grown food. There's some really good research on when you're planting your seeds for, like, say it's almost time for us to plant our gardens, right?
Right.
Actually putting those seeds in your mouth and actually introducing them to your saliva in your DNA will change the plants, and they will grow what you need. There's some really good research from Russia on that, and I've been doing that for probably 15 years. And
So
so
that sounds like I've read the Anastasia books as well.
yes,
It's always intrigued me. Yeah, our connection with plants and how important that is. Even if it's something like a small garden or herbs, whatever it is. And I'm getting in the garden this weekend for sure. This is the
yeah,
time.
this is the time. Yeah, and
Yeah.
talking to them and hanging out with them, and it's amazing the difference in the foods that you can grow locally. But
Mhm.
if you're not able to do that, get to know your farmer at the farmer's market.
Right.
Yeah,
Exactly.
there's another way to vibrationally connect so that food is just healthier for you and
Exactly.
less stress. So I tend to go to bed early. I go to bed usually between like 9 and 10. If it's winter time, I'm tired within 3 hours of dark, and the same with summer. So my body definitely follows the sun, and I
And what are
listen
you
to it.
doing for fun in all of this?
I dance. I love to belly dance. I love to horseback ride. We ride bikes everywhere. We have a brand new Harley, so we go road trips.
I saw that. You just had a
Did you
birthday,
see?
and
I
I saw a
did, and we
picture
took
on a
a bike.
huge
We took a
orange
motorcycle
horse.
trip.
Good for you.
Yeah,
And
so
happy birthday.
just enjoying. I have a grandbaby that's due to be born in July, so life is going to shift again.
Nice.
So just playing and enjoying life and, enjoying being alive and healthy and having some longevity and hopefully being able to share what I've learned in my years of practice with all you.
Yeah, and you've been so gracious in, again, extending your stay with us. And I apologize to everybody for us coming on late. I'm just glad we got on because I was looking
I am
forward to
too.
this. I was on my schedule today. Like, I can't wait to talk to Deborah. I had my nutrients this morning and I was all ready to talk the hypothalamus. So here we are. And I hope that all of you have found this really enlightening, to use a word for the hypothalamus, light. And if you want to just state any comments, anything that you have here, just as we close.
And even afterwards, I mean, isn't it going to be on?
Yeah.
So if you have any comments, anything you're concerned about, just put it in there, and maybe we can schedule something again and be more specific. Are you all going through perimenopause? Do you have thyroid issues or adrenal issues? I mean, what do you want to talk about? And let's take it from that hypothalamic point of view and try to, work upstream rather than downstream.
Let's do that. Let's make this even more specific. And I think just even talking about stress and really help
absolutely
with because we'll never get rid of stress, right? It's only how we deal with it, how we think about it. And so maybe we do kind of a mind body meets nutrition as it relates to stress through the hypothalamic center.
Yeah, we can do that. And I have a really great little meditation that I could take our viewers through, that just to teach them to calm down really quickly.
Is it something short that we can close with? Do you have time to do that for us now, or is it something?
Yeah, we could do that right now.
Okay, let's do it.
So this is based on some research that you can actually induce a GABA response. We know through breath, taking deep breaths, but we can also induce train our GABA response. So GABA is a calming neurotransmitter. We can also train it through scent and sound. So we're going to do the breath work, but I'm going to ask you to find a scent that you find calming. Vanilla, lavender, my coffee with Nana, whatever you find calming. If it can be in an essential oil, that would be great, so you can get a hold of it really quickly. And
I have tea accessible.
Is that calm? Okay. You don't have to have it right here, just for later. That's what you're going to do. You're going to find a scent that you find calming. And then you're also going to find some music. Now, I actually choose a lullaby that I can easily hum to myself. Okay? But it could be any music at all. So we're doing this. We're doing a Pavlov's dog response. We're going to use scent and sound to induce the GABA response after we train with breath. Okay? So let's say you have your lavender scented candle, you have some beautiful theta music playing in the background that you could easily hum if you wanted to. You're listening to that, you're smelling the candle, and you start to take some deep breaths. And what you're going to do is you're going to breathe. And I like to put my hands down in my lap. And when I take my very first breath, I breathe basically to the top of my chest. And when I'm exhaling, I'm just letting go everything that doesn't serve me anymore in this moment. And then the next breath I take, I bring it all the way down to my diaphragm. Really, really deep. Hold it for a second. And then exhale everything that just isn't serving your highest purpose, your health and well-being. Let it go. The third breath, you're going to breathe all the way down to where your hands are in your lap, as if you're breathing to your root chakra. Take a deep breath as far as you can. Deep, 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 deep. Hold it for a sec and then blow it all out. Just release it all. And you'll notice that your body feels calmer. There's like a little mellow sensation. Deep breathing stimulates your vagal nerve to actually calm things down, and you get this GABA response. So if you do this with your scent and your sound, calming scent and calming sound, you practice this every day for a few minutes. What'll happen is all you'll need to do is smell that smell or hum a few bars, and you'll have an instant GABA response. So when you're in a stressful situation, when I sing myself the lullaby, and I'm instantly in a GABA response and calm down. You have to train.
That lullaby when we couldn't get on. Be live.
I was doing my deep breathing.
You were so calm, by the way.
I was wishing. Well, I was.
You were so calm. You are a
reason for this.
You're just amazing. Thank you so much, Deborah. It's been such a delight.
Thank you for having me. Thank you. Blessings
Absolutely.
to all of you. I hope your hormones stay in harmony and you are as mellow as you can be through your stressors.
Absolutely. Thanks so
All
much.
right. Thank you. Thanks for having me. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.